So today I'm going to tell two stories, both about the struggle for kingdoms. And the idea here is that we let stories interpret themselves. And so I don't know why we don't do this more, but we tend to have like this very set format on what a sermon or a message is supposed to be. If you go to the courthouse, you'll hear a very set expected speech from different people at different times, and on from the pulpit, we don't really have a pulpit, but from the pulpit you hear this very expected normative thing about what a sermon is supposed to be. For example, I went to a Good Friday service a few years ago, and we sit down, and they've invited a preacher from another church in town, and he gets to point number 8 in his sermon, and he tells everyone, this is real, okay? He tells everyone, you're probably wondering how many points I've got. This is the most points I've ever had in any sermon ever. And then he goes on, and we're all thinking he's joking, but he's not. A few seconds later, he comes back to it. Oh, by the way, it's 19 points. I've got 19 points, and we're already exhausted at 8. Anyway, so we have this very set expectation for what sermons are supposed to be, and we're exploring. That's what we're doing. This has nothing to do with today. Today, we're going to tell two stories about struggle for kingdoms. We're very familiar with the fight for power, the struggle for worlds and for climbing to the top, whether that's grades when you're in school or position when you're in a workplace or mobility or whatever that is, power, income that gives you power, whatever that is, we're very comfortable with this story about power and struggling for kingdoms. And so I want to tell two stories this morning about that struggle and what we do with it and where it goes. The first one, well, they're going to be side by side, so it's not first or second. But the first one, we're going to look at something totally random. I didn't know anything about this. I learned about it kind of like you are from reading a story and just sort of engulfing myself in some weird story about Broadway. And so we're going to look through some history of this really like deep struggle and fight to maintain power and authority, and then actually to see that this story is so powerful that it just has to be told. And then the second one, we're going to look through the history of Israel and this struggle for a kingdom that doesn't know what it wants. It isn't quite sure, but is always clamoring to be on top and to be in control when they clearly are often out of control. And so we'll start with Abraham, and then we'll talk a little bit about the kings, and we'll talk a little bit about the Pharisees, and then Jesus. And on the flip side, we're going to talk about ice. We're going to talk about Schubert. Does anyone know Schubert? No. We're going to talk about Schubert, and then we're going to talk about the Great Depression and power and control and restoring Broadway to its glory. So that's fun, right? So Abraham is given this. I mean, this is what's beautiful about this story. If we miss this as a story, we lose out. And I'm going to try to keep my commentary brief anytime I provide commentary. But Abraham is this image of somebody that just sees the presence of God, that just experiences God, and his family is following and listening wholeheartedly. He doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't know what he's doing. All he knows is that he's asked by God to be a blessing to other people. Now, in the ancient world, this is a really weird thing. I mean, it's a weird thing for you, right? If you're told you're supposed to be a blessing to others, it's not about your own struggle, it's not about your own deal, but it's for you to be whole and complete so that you can help others along the way. This is what Abraham's told, and he lives this message, and we watch this story as God calls Abraham. He says, Abraham, you are going to be a great nation. But listen, it's not just to be a kingdom. It's not just to be a big family. It's not just to be who you want to be. It is so that you can provide that greatness and that blessing to all of those others that you come in contact with. In fact, it's such a big statement that we almost don't know what to do with it. You are going to be a blessing to all other nations. And so the story of Abraham and the story of the Israelites that follow all begin at this pivotal moment when Abraham is called to be a blessing to other nations. Not for his own purposes, not for the sake of his family, not for the sake of his lineage, which is very common, not for the sake of his land, which provides food and sustenance for your family, but so that you can bless other nations. It's a really big statement. It is a story that gets at the heart of what God is doing in the Old Testament and then into the New Testament. And the struggle from there, from this point forward, everything is a struggle. Where is this promised land? What is this supposed to look like? Who's on my side and who's not? He comes in contact with some really seedy characters, and God uses them to bless him and to grow this family and to grow this nation. And as time goes, as the family grows, as the community grows, they run into problem after problem. And so the kings show up, and when the people ask for a king, they undo this really alternative family lifestyle because kings are in place for what reason? To support their people, hope, often to support themselves, always an element of power and control. Right? And so the kings bring this new element to the world of the Israelites that changed the dynamic, that changed what they're doing and changed where they're going. And so you begin this internal struggle. Before we get to the external stuff, they're going to have loads of stuff coming down. Before you get to all that, there's this internal struggle of how do we be who we're supposed to be and follow through with this power and control that we think we're supposed to do with God's kingdom or with the Israelite kingdom, Judah's kingdom. And so you just see this constant battle. And you can watch it play out in the text. You can see the kings telling their story. You can see the prophets telling their story, calling them back. Say, come back to what we're called to be, which is a blessing to others. They're saying, listen to our story. Listen to what God has called us to do so that we can carry that forward. In the late 1800s, Broadway, musicals in general began to become known. So it wasn't until like 1890 that we actually have this moment where a musical might be a real thing, where we see this magic that is anyone a fan of musicals? Both of you? Okay. So I really enjoy a great musical. And what happens, there's something magical that happens in this moment when words are transformed into music and the spoken word, not just music, but the spoken word, the message is transformed into lyrics to a song. And sometimes there's not even a song, they're just singing the lyrics. It's just, where else can you find that? It's beautiful. And so in the late 1800s, they're figuring out that this is a thing, and that people will enjoy it, and that there's a desire for it, and that there's a life behind it, and that it has so much power that story should be told this way. There's something special about what's happening in this mixture between story and music and song and voice. And so you start to see the development of Broadway in the early 1900s. Now, about this time, a guy named Sam Schubert comes to the scene. He knows nothing about this. He gets his way into this organization and ends up in the box office. And here's where we talk about ice, okay? So way, way long ago, at least the 1850s, some people look back as far as the Greeks and tickets and plays and stuff. So when you go to a show, or when you purchase tickets for a show, the box office opens. There's a lineup down the street. It's all cash. And the thing is, all of the good seats are gone, even though you're like the sixth person in line. Have you done this before? No, probably not. All of the good seats are gone because there is this process where everything in Broadway is corrupt. Basically from the late 1800s all the way through to like 1960, everything is corrupt. And so they talk and joke about ICE. ICE is the bribe money paid by a broker to somebody in the organization. So the box office treasurer often has special tickets that go to brokers who has paid them a fee. So the ticket might be $10. The broker pays them an extra $5 or $10 or even $15 to get his hands on those really special tickets. Or sometimes an actor has 2 seats as part of their contract in the pit, the prime seating, and so they will sell their tickets at a prime cost to a broker, who then goes out and sells it for $50 to somebody willing to pay it. That money that's paid to the box office treasurer or the actor or whoever it is called ICE, because it just melts away. There's all of this money involved, and it just melts away. And so the producers never see it. The creative people, the sources never see it. And most of all, the angels, the investors, those that have put thousands and thousands of dollars into this, never see that money. And so this ICE, this cash just melts away. That is what the industry thrived on for almost 75 years, was this corrupt process. And the really interesting, weird part is that an investor would put in like a slot machine. They would put in $50,000 into a musical, and it may or may not pay off, but somebody's making money. Brokers are making money. The treasurer is making money. People that just hand out the tickets, they're making money. Everyone has a cut, but the investors never see any of this because there's no real accountability. Nothing. There's fake books. There's, money spent on typical musical or production costs. It's like these just super vague terms. So accountants would come in and review the books, and they say things like, this may or may not be accurate, because they can't account for thousands and thousands of dollars. By the way, a $10 ticket then is like, I don't know, $60 or $70 now. Tons of money going into this. And so immediately inherent in the process is this struggle to get close to somebody that has access to that ICE money. You got to get access to it. If you want to be part of anything, you need to climb the ladder to get power in. Now, the other really corrupt thing about Broadway has been who's in control. And so Schubert, this guy Sam Schubert, gets into this organization, and he starts getting a taste of this power. He starts getting a taste of this money, and so he starts looking for how he can get higher up and more involved. And he becomes the box office treasurer. And then he decides, I don't want to do that. The real money is in owning the theaters. And so he scrounges a bunch of money, and he rents a theater in upstate New York, and he begins Schubert Production Company. Now, if you're familiar here, Schubert is to be the biggest, most robust production company known. And it all started with this guy and his 2 brothers interested in trying to do something in this life of musicals that is just hitting the corners. So he has to fight and struggle for every single bit of control, every bit of story, of song, of dollar that is flowing through. Now, the big company, Abe Erlanger, this is so boss. You ready for this? Erlanger is in control of the syndicate. Seriously, that's what they called themselves, the syndicate. The syndicate controlled everything in Broadway. The syndicate controlled things across the country. If a Broadway show was going to go somewhere else, they controlled those theaters. And so everywhere that Schubert went to try to make a name, he'd have to get second-rate producers, second-rate musicals, second-rate shows to make stuff happen. But he continued to press. And by the time the 1930s rolled around, Schubert had control of like a dozen theaters in New York, and then hundreds of theaters across the U.S. Now, he didn't he didn't own them. He just controlled what plays went there. And so he's fought, and he and his brothers have fought and fought and fought to gain just a little slice, because there's something so unique about this story, about this musical, about these plays, that he has to get his hands on and he has to share. And we think about that phrase, the show must go on. We think about what is so special about this industry. It's not just the ice money. It's not just the money. It's something unique that's happening in this experience that Schubert, Erlanger, all of the men and women that follow them feel the need that this has to be shared. So in the 1920s and 30s, the Great Depression hits. Erlanger and the syndicate that controlled everything just crashed along with the market and lost it all. Schubert should have gone the same way, but he was so passionate about what he was doing and where they were going, and this song that moved people into new places and story that changed lives. He continued to press on. He produced shows at cost. He let people use his theaters even without paying, because something had to maintain if he was going to come out of this moment, this struggle, and still tell those stories. The same thing happens to the Israelites. You see, they are in this constant battle, both internal and external. First the northern kingdom, and then the southern kingdom. And there is this process, that's flipped and reversed, and there's this process where this people is struggling with their identity. They are struggling with their purpose and their call, and everything has come into place so that they could tell God's story. That's what they have to do. That's their purpose. That's their play, their show that is so big, so grand that they have to press on. And so even in the midst of exile, they beg kings to let them go back and rebuild their temple. Even in the midst of onslaughts of other kingdoms surrounding and encroaching upon them, they continue to tell their story. They can't help but tell their story of this guy who is called by God to just go. And about a God that cared so deeply about God's people that he heard their cry and pulled them out of slavery. You see, this story was so powerful that they had to press on. I don't think they use this term, but you can hear it, right? The show must go on. And as that story continues, you continue to see the power and the struggle and the dynamics play out on into the New Testament. This is where it gets lots of fun, because we see a corollary with our own lives and our own priests and religious leaders and denominational structures and all of this thing, is is that when we get to the New Testament, we see this struggle. The Pharisees, the Sadducees are struggling with each other, but they're also now the kings in charge. Not literally, but they have all the control. They have all the power. They have everything. And Jesus is the voice in the night calling people back to what they are supposed to be doing. I'm not sure